Good afternoon, everyone, or good time, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us. I think right now we have 90 participants in the room, and hopefully we're having more and more attendees. My name is Mustafa Abedini Fard. I am an assistant professor without review of Persian literary culture and civilization in the Department of Asian Studies at the University of British Columbia. Before anything, I would like to acknowledge that although we are gathering virtually today, UBC Vancouver campus is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This lecture is the fourth in the winter 2020 series of the Alireza Ahmadian lectures in Iranian and Persianate studies. These lectures, as you might know, were renamed in 2019 in honor of Alireza Ahmadian, who was a beloved former student and member of the Canadian Iranian community. And thanks to his family and friends, the funding for this series has currently been secured until the end of the 2025-26 academic year. I am looking forward to introducing our speaker today. But before that, as usual, there's a couple of points I would like to mention. First, we are recording this session to post afterwards on the website event page, especially on YouTube. We have also received a great number of questions for the presenter, and Dr. Yaghoobi has incorporated many, if not most of these questions into her presentation because these have been received previously. But I would like to invite you to please type additional questions in the Q&A box, and the sooner the better. And if we have time at the end, she will address what she can. I would also like to give a thank you to our behind the scenes team of Sophie, Connie, and An, as well as Darius for the subtitles, and also, of course, Razman for the great poster design. Dr. Claudia Yaghoobi is a Roshan Institute Associate Professor in Persian Studies at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She is the author and co-editor of several books and publications, including the 2020 book, Temporary Marriage in Iran, Gender and Body Politics in Modern Iranian Film and Literature, published by Cambridge University Press. She also received the Hamid Shahidian Critical Feminist Prize awarded by the Iranian Women's Studies Foundation in 2014. The title of Dr. Yaghoobi's talk, as you can see from the screen, is Representation of Sigheh Women in Modern Iranian Cultural Productions. Please join me in virtually welcoming Dr. Yaghoobi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abedini Fard, for this kind invitation and for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. Good evening, good afternoon. Hi to everybody. I would like to also thank the Alireza Ahmadian family for sponsoring this lecture series. We need more of this lecture series in Iranian studies field. So thank you so much. Thanks also to UBC Department of Asian Studies and UBC Persian Club. And also thanks to Sophie, Connie, An, Darius, and Razman for all the logistics working with me for this event. Now, as Dr. Abedini Fard mentioned, the title of my talk today is Representation of Sigheh Women in Modern Iranian Cultural Productions, and it's based on my new book. Before talking about the book, I would like to give you a little background or information about what Sigheh marriages are and the evolution of Sigheh marriages in modern Iran. So Sigheh is a tradition that predates Islam in the Arabian Peninsula. It remains a legitimate function among the Iranian 12er Shiites. Omar, the second caliph, outlawed Sigheh but Shiites have chosen to view this command as optional and non-binding. Even though it is banned in Sunni communities, some forms of the custom have survived in unions known as urfi and mesyar. Now, what are urfi and mesyar unions? Urfi marriages are just like common law marriages without state registration or recognition. And they are not religiously endorsed either, or historically they were not religiously sanctioned. However, in Iran, after 1979 revolution, Sunni clerics began making urfi more legitimate. So now it is assumed to have religious blessings. How about mesyar unions? Mesyar unions are mainly for traveling men, and they are practiced predominantly in Saudi Arabia and Emirates. Mesyar unions are religiously sanctioned, and they grew popular through migrant workers in the Gulf region. However, they are similar to sex tourism because of the involvement of underage girls. Now let's go back to Sigheh marriages or temporary marriage in Shia Islam in Iran. These are traditionally between old, rich traveling men and young women. However, this was the traditional form and it has evolved. So today it's very different, and I will explain that. It is usually considered, to be paralleled with prostitution or sex work by urban middle-class Iranians. The practice has survived because it is beneficial to certain class of women, such as widowed and divorced women from lower socioeconomic strata of the society. However, it is, majorly or predominantly detrimental to women, and I will explain that too. Now, ideologically, Shiite doctrines draw a line between Sigheh marriages, that is temporary marriages, and nikah marriages, which are the formal marriages in Iran. What are the differences? The couple who want to enter a Sigheh marriage come upon an agreement. In this agreement, the initial agreement, the duration of Sigheh must be noted. The amount of mehr or dowry or the financial exchange must be also indicated. In Sigheh marriages, there is no alimony or nafaqeh, while in nikah marriages there is. And there is no formal divorce for Sigheh marriages, because as I mentioned, the duration is noted in the contract. The contract can be registered and written or just verbal, but the duration needs to be noted. Now, by the end of the duration that they agreed upon, the contract is done and there is a divorce basically. However, the man in this relationship can end the marriage at any time he wishes, while the woman cannot. So there we have a double standard already. Then in the Sigheh marriages, Sigheh women have to keep a period of abstinence, which is called Eda, for 2 menstrual cycles or 45 days, while in nikah marriages, this is 3 menstrual cycles. Now, the reason for this period of abstinence, which means she cannot enter another Sigheh contract during this time, is for proof of paternity if there is a pregnancy. In Sigheh marriages, there is no inheritance for the Sigheh woman. However, the Sigheh children do inherit if the man accepts responsibility and the paternity. In modern Iran, historically, I'll start from Qajar era. which goes up to 1925, Sigheh marriages were used as tools for various political purposes. For instance, one way Sigheh marriage was viewed was as a measure to avoid gender segregation, as opposed to being a mere sexual outlet. Although pleasure and gratification in a legal context were still used as reasons for Sigheh, and men might still bring Sigheh wives home as maids for their nikah wives, other times these sexual liaisons would only last for a few hours. Now, according to Professor Janet Afari, it became apparent that Sigheh was also heavily class-based. Women in the lower strata of society, for example, worked for bazari, that is marketplace businessmen, and provided them with an income source through Sigheh. These same bazaris only approved of Sigheh for their own daughters if the man involved was of a higher social status, but they would contract out their employees who relied on them financially to anyone. Sigheh was a great source of income for clerics at this time too, who approached divorced or widowed women and made arrangements for them to become Sigheh wives for men traveling or on pilgrimage. Now, during the Pahlavi era, from 1925 to 1979, beginning with Reza Shah, the regime prioritized a major health campaign as a state policy. At this time, Sigheh, just like sex work, was viewed popularly as the reason for the spread of venereal diseases in medical and legal circles, even though clerics denied any link between the two and opposed any measures taken by the state that would curtail male sexual privilege. Clerics argued that men who contracted Sigheh marriages would not visit sex workers and would therefore not spread venereal diseases. Reza Shah's government was only focused on traditional marital hygiene, population control, and sex work. It did not concern questions of Sigheh or address any concerns about Sigheh and the venereal diseases specifically. Even the Marriage Act of 1931, which required pre-marriage health certificate from men, did not curb infection rates, and it still permitted polygamy, even though it required the registration of Sigheh marriages. So despite all the dramatic changes that we see during Pahlavi era in terms of gender reforms specifically and modernization, these reforms mostly affected women in urban middle-class communities, while the institution of marriage remained much the same in poor, rural, and urban communities. Although monogamy was still the norm in rural and migrant communities at this time, Sigheh still existed because it functioned as a source of income as well as a sexual outlet for both clerics and some bazari businessmen. Under the Islamic Republic, first on Ayatollah Khomeini's agenda was to purify Iran of any Western remnants, beginning with purification of Tehran's red light district, whose female inhabitants were arrested and imprisoned or sent to rehabilitation centers where they were forced to contract Sigheh with a Revolutionary Guard or a war veteran. After the revolution, Sigheh was encouraged by the state, and the public pulpit of Friday prayers became a platform from which clerics were able to encourage it. Sigheh was presented as a sawab, that is heavenly reward, and as a means to prevent social and sexual disorder. During and after the Iran-Iraq War in 1980s, then President Hashemi Rafsanjani promoted Sigheh as a means to solve the socioeconomic problems of young war widows. Now, many women for whom Sigheh marriage was their best option were from lower economic and social strata. Hence, Sigheh during and after the war was another factor in maintaining gender and class-based inequalities. Many urban middle-class women, however, even though they abhorred Sigheh marriages, began to use the practice to their own advantage at this time for reasons of social mobility and financial advancement. Now, they became Sigheh of men affiliated with the state who could provide them with a posh lifestyle. They kept these liaisons secret, however, because of the stigma that Sigheh marriages carry, particularly for women. In addition to utilizing Sigheh marriages to solve social problems associated with war widows, the Islamic Republic also encouraged Sigheh as a measure to circumvent social and sexual disorders. And what does that mean? For example, some youth started using Sigheh to their advantage to avoid state restrictions enforced locally by the morality guard, for instance, in cases of their dating, the kind of Western dating that they wanted to engage in. Sigheh also, as a trial marriage, became known and common during this time for the youth who wished to get to know each other before their nikah marriage. During the 2000s, the state offered to open chastity houses, or what was called Khaneh Ifaf, for members of the Pasdaran, Basij, and war veterans, where they could use Sigheh with sex workers. So it was supposed to be a specified building with the sex workers living in that building and having, health certificate and being basically monitored and controlled. However, this proposal faced much criticism and the bill never passed. During Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's presidency between 2005 and 2013, Sigheh once again made headlines as Iran's solution to its social problems. For example, in 2007, Ahmadinejad's interior minister encouraged Iranian youth to enter Sigheh marriages without their parents' knowledge. The public responded to this advice with strong resistance. Ahmadinejad released a statement clarifying that the interior minister's offer should be viewed as a cleric's proposal rather than that of a state representative. In 2007, the parliament also proposed several reforms to a number of important articles in the family protection law, including Article 22, which proposed the removal of the requirement to register Sigheh, hence removing women and children's financial and legal rights in Sigheh marriages. Between 2008 and 2013, the bill was discussed several times. There was much resistance against this bill from women's rights activists, and finally, it was made law in 2013. Now, based on this law, Sigheh is registered only if the woman is pregnant, if she asks for a registration at the time of their initial agreement, and if it is meant to turn into a nikah marriage ultimately. Under the Islamic Republic, religious and pilgrimage zones and clerics still maintain their important role, just like the previous regimes too. Now, onto my book, how did this project come about? Part of the project was conducted at the archives of the National Library in Iran during 2015 to 2017, which revealed about 50 short stories and novels with a focus on Sigheh marriages under the Pahlavi regime. In these works, Sigheh is used in various contexts with different connotations and interpretations. At times, it is used as a central theme of the plot, and on other occasions as a sub-theme. Based on the data that I received, I put them in different categories. As you can see on the screen, we have, for example, religious factors, we have political factors or power relations, we have socio-cultural factors, and there were a few works which reference the advantages of Sigheh for widowed and divorced women. Now, my research in the National Library of Iran did not return any substantive literary works written and published under the Islamic Republic that focused primarily on the subject of Sigheh and its impact on women. So I opted for cinematic works, and I used 2 cinematic works instead. The few literary works that I found written under the Islamic Republic either focused on Sigheh in the context of the relationship between Sigheh and Arab sheikhs, or the setting of the story was during Pahlavi era, which was not my goal. So I used cinematic works. Now, there was a stark contrast between the works that I looked at during the Pahlavi era and the ones under the Islamic Republic. In the literature, from the Pahlavi era, we have predominantly women who enter Sigheh out of financial necessity or to save family face and honor, and they are usually younger women. Most of them are illiterate and they don't have any familiarity with Sigheh at the time that they get into Sigheh marriages. While under the Islamic Republic, those same representations are present, an additional representation is that of women who are educated and independent, who enter Sigheh for their sexual needs or because they desire motherhood, even though that motherhood might be single motherhood. Now, the works that I looked at, I have listed all the works here. There are 5 literary works from the Pahlavi era, and then 2 cinematic works that were produced under the Islamic Republic. Each work reflects the manner in which the practice of Sigheh impacts women by calling into question how sexuality works as a form of political analysis and power. In this book, while I focus on modern Iranian cultural productions, I move beyond the literary and cinematic realms and examine in depth a rather controversial socio-cultural and religious institution. My analysis examines the figure of Sigheh woman as the sexual other in Iranian fiction and literature, fiction and film. Because bodies are the bedrock upon which societies stand, it is important for us as readers to explore how and why women's bodies, in this case, in the case of my book, those of Sigheh women characters' bodies, engage with the state and society. It is also critical to understand what constitutes a transgressing body, because Sigheh women's bodies are considered to be transgressing and non-normative in Iranian society. So how are these transgressing bodies excluded, marginalized, and threatened? In this book, I consider body as a battlefield for power. And because Sigheh women's bodies are transgressing, and therefore they do threaten the normative narratives about female sexuality in Iranian society, so they are excluded and marginalized. However, because they pose a threat to normative discourses, they are also hypervisible and they need to be policed and regulated. So here I have a passage from the book that sums up my argument. While this book shows that the female body is an embodiment of socio-cultural, political, and historical possibilities that are part of the regulatory discourse of the larger power structure, it also highlights the fact that the female body has agency. Despite the fact that female characters are portrayed as invisible, liminal, vulnerable, and often stigmatized, especially in the case of Sigheh women, they are simultaneously depicted as exercising a certain power by occupying a significant space in the social imaginary of the dominant Iranian culture. It is through this dual position that they disrupt the standard narratives about Iranian women and their sexuality. Sigheh women pose threats to the status quo, hold power over men, and create anxiety over male sexuality in Iranian society, even while they themselves are marginalized and subject to violence. Now, because I don't have time to cover all the chapters of the book today for you, and I hope you will, read the book, I will just look at a few chapters. The book has a prologue, an introduction, 8 chapters, and an epilogue. Today, I will try to look at 3 of those chapters very briefly. So let's look at Morteza Mosheqe Kazemi's novel Tehran Makhuf, or Horrid Tehran, which was published in 1954. Mosheqe Kazemi's Tehran Makhuf approaches the female Sigheh bodies as a canvas on which the transitioning sociocultural and political scripts of the collapsing Qajar era and the nascent Pahlavi era are projected. So if those of you who have read the story, you might know that the setting of the story is on the eve of 1921 coup d'etat by Reza Khan. This script placed women in positions of subordination, and the transgressions against these positions culminate in women's loss of agency. The novel examines matters of personal agency linked to the female body, including reproduction, abortion, and venereal diseases. The novel also focuses on women's suffering at the hands of a patriarchal system in the years surrounding the 1921 coup d'etat, a system that considers women property to be owned or commodities to be used, exchanged, or sold. However, I also argue that the novel phrases the female body as a site of resistance to this oppression, where power is reclaimed via counter discourses. Through the embodiment of the female characters such as Effat and Mahin and all other women in the brothel, Mosheqe Kazemi shows that the female body is a site of power and social inscriptions that simultaneously threaten the logic behind the status quo. So the characters, the female characters in this book are all women who are one way or the other, they have entered the sex work. At the time, they are all engaging sex work in a brothel, so which is also representative of the corruption of the political regime and the sociocultural climate of the time. But all of them have entered sex work due to an initial Sigheh marriage. And they have been abused by the clergy and the law enforcement during their Sigheh marriages and later during their sex work. Whereas these women are living on the margins of the society, vulnerable and stigmatized, the novel also highlights their dominance in the social and cultural imaginary. And how does the novel do this? Almost all the men who are fascinated with these women rely on them for pleasure. Sometimes, even in the book, when we have people of power or political figures involving in Sigheh or sex work, are controlled by the Sigheh women in terms of their political decisions that they make. Although these women are seen as non-thinking objects by the male characters and are heavily stigmatized in the novel, in several moments in the story, they subvert the status quo and resist the dominant discourse of women's so-called, quote-unquote, proper place in society. Now, here's a passage from my book, from this chapter. Mosheqe Kazemi's Tehran Makhuf explores political and government corruption and social insecurity in the years after the Constitutional Revolution, as well as the public's desperation after the Constitutional Revolution failed to achieve its intended result. It is significant in depicting the fatherless female nation in the hands of ineffectual monarchs and government officials. This political inefficacy is portrayed in Tehran Makhuf in its treatment of the country, but also of its women, the female body, and sexuality. With Reza Shah's emergence as the ruler of the nation and his attempts to unify the nation under Mother Iran, the nation, or Vatan, and the female body came under the protection of the collective masculine monarch and state. Now, the next work I will look at is Jalal al-Ahmad's Jasn Farkhonde, or Auspicious Celebration, published in 1969. Before I look at Jalal al-Ahmad's short story, let me mention the fact that Sigheh marriages have different types. Some of them are of a sexual nature, and others are non-sexual. In Jalal al-Ahmad's story, we have the non-sexual type. In Jasn Farkhonde, Al-Ahmad critiques the Pahlavi regime's modernization agenda, especially the police-enforced unveiling of women as superficial mimicry. Dissidents viewed such policies as efforts to imitate Western values and methods in the name of modernity and progress, thus robbing Iranian women of their subjectivity. Jasn Farkhonde focuses on the police-enforced decree to unveil women during Reza Shah's reign in 1935-1936. At the time, the reaction to this state-enforced decree varied from class to class and from region to region. Most modernist upper-class members hailed it as a sign of women's liberation. Now, the story recounts events surrounding one of these mixed gender parties during this time, which were celebrating women's liberation, exploring the contradictions between the religious values of the narrator's family and the socio-political climate under the Pahlavi regime. So what happens is, at the beginning of the story, our narrator, whose name is Abbas, his father is a famous, important clergy member. He receives, Abbas's father receives an invitation to one of these mixed gender parties celebrating women's liberation from the Pahlavi regime. And because he doesn't want to take his wife to this party unveiled, so he decides to contract Sigheh marriage with a more modern woman who's the daughter of one of his friends in order to both attend the party, but also not take his wife unveiled to this party. So the narrative highlights the attempts of the Pahlavi government to align the clergy's values, religious values, with their agenda of modernization. Many women had difficulty at this time reconciling traditional family structures with the state's modernization policies. In this way, the female body became the locus for social and national reform as mediated by politics. Jashn Farkhonde highlights the ways in which a Sigheh woman's body becomes a site of both oppression and resistance in order to reconcile politics and religion. On the one hand, the female body is used to the male benefit here, to this clergy's benefit, yet simultaneously her body is used to further the national interests of religious and political institutions. So the female body in this case becomes a tool of resistance, enabling men to disrupt the law's reach and authorizing religious leaders to defy government decree. Here is another passage from this chapter. Ahmad dramatizes the instrumentalization of the female body by political and religious institutions, each for its own gain. Ahmad's Jashn Farkhonde highlights the clashes between the Pahlavi regime's modernization agenda and the ulama's resistance to westernized progress. Ahmad addresses the issue of modernization, how it intersects with anxieties over losing or sacrificing indigenous culture, and the role of women in a nation state heading toward Western modernization. In so doing, Jashn Farkhonde depicts how modern Iranian womanhood struggles between political and religious institutions and against the public perception of the interaction between modernity and tradition. In turn, the female body becomes a tool of reconciliation concerning socio-cultural, political, and religious forces. Now, the next chapter I will look at is the final chapter of my book before the epilogue, which is Mohammad Hossein Farahbakhsh's Zendegi-ye Khususi, or Private Life, produced in 2011. So this one is a cinematic work. In Zendegi-ye Khususi, the protagonist, Ibrahim, a fundamentalist that has turned into a reformist, encounters Parisa. Parisa is a young, beautiful, educated, independent woman who has just returned from the UK. She smokes cigarettes, writes erotica, is the worst, lives alone, and has no hesitations about having a relationship with a non-mahram or an unrelated man. She is also firmly against religion and marriage, both of which she considers institutions that limit individual freedom. The two spend an entire day together at a ski resort. They go to an art gallery while Ibrahim's wife is out of town. At the end of the day, they return to Parisa's home after dinner when Ibrahim proposes that they contract Sigheh to avoid sin. The relationship results in a pregnancy, and Ibrahim refuses to accept paternity and suggests that Parisa terminate the pregnancy. Now, according to film critic Alireza Pursabagh, and I'm quoting, Parisa's introduction as an easygoing and unrestrained woman who does not deserve having a family, while also demanding marriage and family from Ibrahim, is contradictory, unquote. Rather than contradictory, I argue that Parisa is a complex, multidimensional character, and the film's viewers should resist placing her into this Madonna whore binary. Parisa is portrayed as a calm, kind, and art-loving woman who, after her relationship with Ibrahim and her resulting pregnancy, desperately seeks to convince Ibrahim to accept his paternity and arrange for a birth certificate for their unborn child. So she cannot get a birth certificate for the child without his accepting the paternity. So we have an educated and independent woman here, depicted as quote unquote unrestrained and hysterical, simply because she seeks equal rights and wants a birth certificate for her unborn child. Through Parisa's pregnancy and alleged madness, because the film presents her as this hysterical, mentally deranged woman, the film blurs the lines between two issues: women's reproductive rights and the archetype of the vengeful, mentally unstable, and deceitful other woman. The film conflates the case of a woman's fundamental right to choose whether she has an abortion with that of a woman who threatens a prominent political figure's nikah marriage and family. Ibrahim is faced with Parisa's aggressive actions of protest later, and Parisa is portrayed as hysterical. In a discriminatory legal system, Parisa has limited rights over her body, and her behavior is represented as hysterical. While state and religion under the Islamic Republic claim that Sigheh women have legal status, in practice, Sigheh women such as Parisa have limited rights. Now here's another quote from this chapter of my book. As an educated and independent woman, Parisa entered a consensual and legal relationship, got pregnant, and wants to keep the child. She only asks Ibrahim to recognize paternity so she can get a birth certificate for it. Now, if they were in a formal marriage, there would be no question that they could keep their child. If they were unmarried, there would also be no question in an Iranian society that they do not have the right to a child. But this is a Sigheh union, and Sigheh unions are somewhere in between. On the one hand, the law says the woman is married, and on the other hand, the man can deny paternity if he decides to do so, and the burden of proof is placed on her. What is, however, more significant here is that Sigheh unions are not affairs. By law, they are legitimate unions, yet not treated as a real marriage as such. Thank you so much for attending and listening to me. I would be happy to answer any questions. You have my email address on the screen if you would like to email me later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia John. I really enjoyed the presentation. And I can't help but noticing the serene and tranquil tone that you had throughout. It was very conspicuous and lovely. Thanks so much. So far, we have received 2 questions. I mean, other than all of the questions we had received previously, which were around, I don't know, like 10 or 15, which you kindly embedded into your presentation. So if you don't mind, I'll read the first question to you. Here's the first question. For those who used Sigheh as trial before nikah, could it not include sex for very conservative families? I think we received this before. You might have mentioned something about this, because you did mention about how there are 2 types, but do you mind elaborating a little bit on this? And thanks for the question, the person who asked the question, whose name I don't have here.
Thank you so much for that question. And yeah, the serene tone that you are referring to is because, I mean, this is not a fun thing for women. And as a woman, this was very personal for me, you know, working on this topic and seeing all this, you know, detrimental impacts on women. So
absolutely,
that's why I take it very seriously. But about the question, thanks to the attendee who is asking this question, the Sigheh, the trial Sigheh marriages, which are all in Persian called Sigheh Mahramiyat, are basically meant for the couple to get to know each other. It's not supposed to involve sexual, you know, interaction, but sexual interaction can happen, and it's legitimate and legal.
I see. Yes, yeah, the question belonged to Noma. And the second question comes from Sherilyn, our captain and head of the department. Does the gender of the writer or filmmaker influence the way Sigheh women are depicted? And I'm, if you don't mind, I would add also that, because it's interesting, all of the examples that you mentioned come from either male directors or authors, right? So were there any female directors or authors whose work you also came across? And how would they, if yes, how did they treat the topic?
Yes, thank you so much, Sherilyn, for this question. It's actually, I addressed this question in the epilogue of the book. Which was curious for myself because I tried to find works by women focusing on Sigheh marriage. Even though there are some works during the Pahlavi era referencing female sexuality, female body, or even Sigheh marriages very briefly or just passing, such as, you know, we have works from Furugh Farrokhzad referencing this, or from Parsi Pur, for example, but they were not spending the majority of their space or their room in their work, in the fictional work on the topic of Sigheh. So I couldn't use them for the book because it was a very passing mention. Now, under the Islamic Republic, I could not find any works written by women. I did find a couple of works referencing Sigheh marriages by women who are called, the works are called popular novels, or kind of like yellow literature. I don't know, the highbrow, lowbrow kind. So that's why I decided not to use them. And there were no works by Iranian women under the Islamic Republic, or men for that matter, that referenced Sigheh marriages or represented women in Sigheh marriages. And the two films that I used, actually, both films were banned. So both films were shown, screened in Iran for a very brief time period. Both received strong resistance and criticism from, for example, Zendegi-ye Khususi was screened very briefly for a couple of weeks, and then it received a lot of criticism from Ansar Hezbollah. I think it's like Guardians of God or something. And then it was taken down, and the MCIG, which is the Ministry of Culture, was criticized because of giving, for example, permission to the release of the film. And then the main actor, the protagonist, Farhad Aslani, won the Best Actor award for this film in Fajr Festival, However, even the Ansar Hezbollah even denounced that award at the time. So even those two films are basically that show the detrimental impact.
They were controversial.
They were controversial. They were banned, and the reason I picked these two films it's not because they are art films. It's just mainly because of the topic of Sigheh in those films. And yes, I have extensively discussed the problematics of men talking about women and men talking about Sigheh women and Sigheh women's bodies and sexualities in the book. However, I also have to acknowledge that while Iranian women today are not talking about Sigheh marriages specifically because it's a very sensitive topic for the Islamic Republic, however, since 1980s, we've had this very flourishing trend of Iranian women writers who are attending to women's concerns, women's life, women's lived experiences, women's bodies and sexuality. So they do focus on other topics that are not as controversial. Sigheh is basically endorsed by Islamic Republic and a red line.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Because yes, I have noticed that, for instance, there are many female authors. I'm not sure about directors. At least one director, Negar Azerbaijani, for instance, are attending to the topic of transgender and transsexual and sex reassignment surgery. But still, when it comes to Sigheh, it's interesting to know that it's not the same.
And Mustafa, even the topic of transgender issues and concerns, isn't it by diaspora directors?
Even within Iran, probably because of the religious fatwa that exists on the permissibility of sex reassignment surgery. Because I have been, researching a little bit about the topic for a paper. There are quite a few novels, actually, and short stories, and interestingly, mostly by female authors. So that's really interesting. Yeah, within Iran. Yeah. Thank you so much, Claudia Jan. Let's see if we have any other questions. We might have time for just one more question. So the audience, if there's any other questions, and if not, I can see that Sophie has just posted the link to Dr. Okay, it just arrived, the question number 3. Shalha, it says here, it could be Shahla, but Shahla says, thank you for your talk. Most recently, this topic was addressed in Aghazadeh TV series, which caused a huge debate across social media. But my question is whether you could see any positive sides to the topic. Thank you, Shahla, for this question. So let this be the final question.
Thank you, Shahla, for this question. I actually follow the Iranian TV series and Iranian films very closely to keep myself up to date with Iran. And I have been watching Aghazadeh, and I was watching that scene, and I actually was shaking, kind of seeing that moment, because it was horrible. It was, I don't know, very, it wasn't pleasant to watch it. Let's put it that way. But what was the question, Mustafa?
No worries. So Shala is asking, my question is whether you could see any positive sides to the topic. And I guess basically she is meaning even the fact that it was depicted, right, on TV, basically.
Yeah, so the depiction, the representation in Aghazadeh was to me, was very parallel to sex work. Mm-hmm. So that is why it made me kind of, abhor that scene, basically. However, yes, to answer your question, there are positives to the practice, And I mentioned that it is positive for the divorced and widowed women and certain women who financially basically need to enter Sigheh marriages. And that is why the practice has survived. Because otherwise it would not have survived with all these clashes and criticisms and different backlashes from women's rights activists. And then, of course, the non-sexual type of Sigheh is very common and popular amongst the more religious part of the society, which apparently Aghazadeh was referencing that. However, the way that it was represented in that scene, it was very obvious that something else was being referenced.
I agree, especially because so many jokes basically were produced after that, right? Related to that particular scene, which if we accept that, jokes and humor, one of the functions is basically to give way to somehow some unresolved tensions over there. It showed those unresolved tensions. So basically many people were taking it as having sexual innuendo and sexual tones in it. I do agree. Sophie has mentioned that there are actually a couple of other questions, but I should apologize too, because we're trying to actually keep all the sessions within 1 hour at as much as we can. However, I would certainly encourage and invite those who have more questions, and that's why we have included this last, and Dr. Claudia Yaghoobi has kindly included this last slide. As you can see, she is happy to be contacted via email if you have more questions, if you would like to continue the conversation with her. Also, there is a link, a feedback link that Sophie, I guess, just might have sent or will send. Yes, she has just sent it. So please take 5 minutes to complete that feedback link, the survey. It will help us to improve the quality of our program. And also we hope to see you in about 2 weeks on November 28th. It's again a Saturday at 4 p.m. PST. Most of our talks are held at 4 p.m. Vancouver time. The title is Persian, Pahlavi, and Teaching Farsi. And our speaker will be Dr. Rastin Mehri from the University of Simon Fraser University. I would like to say thank you very much again to Claudia John for accepting our invitation. It was a pleasure having you. And many thanks to all of our attendees. We had around, including ourselves, we had 105 people in the room, which is, I think, is quite something for Saturday afternoon. Thanks again, Claudia John. And have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mustafa. Good night.
Thanks, and bye, everyone.